Recall that the organizational model of media coverage explains some bias patterns by looking at the structure of media as a social institution. As we already touched upon, economics can shape coverage. And with the rise of social media, traditional media outlets have had to cut costs to keep up. To save money, editors have started favoring generalist reporters over specialist reporters. Whereas a specialist reporter would write about the same topic over and develop expertise and social networks in it and a background, generalist reporters are expected to write about different topics every day. Transit in the morning, education in the afternoon, health the next day, disasters the next day. And so the news outlet doesn't need to pay multiple reporters who may not have a story every day. Generalist reporters are cheaper and more efficient. But how might this affect disaster coverage? If a reporter doesn't know a lot about a region a disaster happens in, or even about disasters itself, they may end up reinforcing stereotypes, particularly if they don't have the funds to do a detailed on-the-ground investigation. We've already talked about the cost of sending a reporter into the field overnight, and this is translated into an urban-rural reporting bias. But this similar bias also applies between nations. Does the news agency already have journalists stationed in the country the disaster is happening in? News agencies are likely to have journalists in certain countries over others. Are there language or cultural barriers in obtaining first-hand accounts of a disaster in another nation? And if there are no reporters on the ground from your particular organization, how easy and costly is it to source quality news copy from international news agencies who are on the ground? If a generalist reporter doesn't have a lot of time to write their article, they're more likely to get quotes and information from official sources. Think about someone who works for the government. You're going to be able to Google their name or Google their office. You're going to know that they're there from 9 to 5. They're going to have a listed phone number and an email address. And so a reporter in a pinch is more likely to contact that person as opposed to trying to track down someone surviving a disaster. And because of this tendency to rely on official government sources for information, disaster news is more likely to represent the interests and perspectives of those officials. So if you're a politician in charge of disaster risk reduction, you might downplay the harm of what is happening, just like the mayor of Chicago did with the media during the heat wave of 1995. People in positions of power being quoted in the media are not going to call themselves out responsible. They're more likely to highlight things like untamable nature and how we couldn't have expected this to happen. So when we talk about disaster media coverage, we're usually not talking about a conspiracy or any particular ill will on the part of reporters. Reporters generally want to get thorough and accurate information. But the structure and organization of news collection makes it so that reporters and editors tend to write the same types of stories over and over. So far, we've focused on mass media coverage of disasters. And when I say mass media, I mean print, radio, television, and other traditional communication technologies that reach many people with one-way messages. This communication is one way because we, the audience, are the receivers. And we're not the ones writing or editing the messages we get in the news. Mass media can shape public opinion about a disaster by setting the agenda. Agenda setting refers to activities by large media conglomerates to determine the amount, frequency, and type of coverage given to a disaster. It might seem like news about a disaster is coming from lots of different sources, but research shows it is only a handful of media conglomerates producing the narrative in most cases. So we need to think about how agenda setting operates through concentrated media ownership. There's two ways of thinking about media ownership: degree and form. Degree asks questions like, how many people or groups have a piece of the media pie? We know that concentration of the privately owned media has increased over time. Fewer and fewer people control Canada's mass media with every passing decade. Canada in particular has very high and increasing levels of media concentration. This figure shows changes in this concentration over time from 2008 to 2019. It indicates that the top 4 companies' share of the Canadian media economy has more than doubled in this period, from 27% in 2008 to 56% in 2019. The second way to think about media ownership is the form of concentration. What kinds of mediums do people own? We saw a major change in this before and after 1990. Before 1990, ownership was horizontally integrated, meaning that a small number of firms tried to control as much production as possible in their particular fields. So one media corporation would try to own all the newspapers. Another media corporation would try to own all the radio stations, for example. But after 1990, ownership became vertically integrated, and media firms sought to control production and distribution in many fields by becoming conglomerates. A media conglomerate may own any combination of TV networks, stations, production facilities, magazines, newspapers, book publishers, cable channels, cable systems, sports teams, web portals, software companies. Think of Apple, for example. The company doesn't simply sell its finished product, like your MacBook, but is involved in both designing and manufacturing it on one end and creating platforms for storing and streaming on the other end. So companies like Apple can both create content and deliver it in various forms. So again, the implication here is that it might seem like you're getting the same message about a disaster from multiple different sources that did their own research and reporting, but it might all go back to just 1 or 2 or 3 media conglomerates with the same owner. We know that in mass media agenda setting, editors and journalists act as gatekeepers within a context of concentrated media ownership. But how do platforms like X or Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram influence what the public sees, feels, and acts on during disasters? Unlike mass media, social media is decentralized. Anyone can post, share, and amplify content. In the case of the 2023 Maui wildfires, locals posted TikTok videos of tourists swimming while fires raged. Viral outrage quickly shifted the media focus from environmental causes of the disaster to questions around ethical tourism. Local voices use Instagram to demand aid and accountability. In fact, 70% of disaster-related content on Twitter or X comes from non-journalistic sources. But algorithms still shape what we see. Hashtags like "Pray for Turkey" or viral videos of fires can dominate attention. Influencers and citizen journalists often set the tone before news outlets catch up. Social media has the potential to be a useful disaster resource. The United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction is trying to structure user input from social media to provide reliable updates in real time. Take a look.